Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Antoine Thira, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this year's Global INSEAD Day celebration and to the first global webinar for this occasion, co-hosted by INSEAD Lifelong Learning and the National Alumni Association in France. Today, we celebrate what makes INSEAD truly extraordinary, our diversity, our deep connections, and our shared commitment to making a meaningful impact to the world. The theme for this year is bridging communities, connecting the world, and it really couldn't be more timely. Now, over the last few days, we've already seen come to life in so many places and formats, from gala dinners, alumni gatherings in Shanghai, in Paris, Colombo, in Germany, masterclasses and panel discussions in Abu Dhabi and Singapore. And what really strikes me is that even in a world that's changing so quickly, the INSEAD spirit continues to be such a powerful force, bringing people together and driving progress. So to all our alumni tuning in today, I want to say thank you. Thank you for staying engaged, for championing the values of the school, and for continuing to build bridges across industries, cultures, and continent. And that spirit of connection leads us perfectly to today's webinar. The topic for our webinar today is building purpose-driven careers, because the impact we have as a community begins with the purpose we bring to our own careers. Now, we know that careers rarely follow a straight path. I'm sure many of you connected today can relate to that. We change roles, we change industries, we change locations, and we ourselves grow and evolve. So how do we stay connected to our sense of purpose? And how does that purpose change as our careers and lives progress? And then we also want to ask the question, equally important, how can leaders and organizations support this process so that purpose isn't just an individual journey, but something nurtured and sustained within our workplace and communities? To help us explore these questions, we're joined by two outstanding speakers. First, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Winnie Jiang, Assistant Professor of Organization Behavior at INSEAD. Actually, Winnie and I met 4 years ago, and we share a common passion for career management, and we've since collaborated on several publications. Winnie's research explores how people find and sustain meaning in their work, especially through career transitions. And her research looks at a broad range of occupations. I'm also thrilled to share that this year, Winnie was recognized on the prestigious Thinkers 50 radar list, alongside many brilliant minds. I'm equally delighted to welcome Axel Reinaud, who's an MBA 97J, that's a few months after I graduated. Axel co-founded and is the CEO of NetZero. That's a climate venture pioneering long-term carbon removal. He'll talk more about it. NetZero recently won a 50 million X prize for its innovative biochar solution. And before becoming an entrepreneur, Axel spent over 20 years at BCG, where he held several leadership roles. So here's how our webinar will unfold today. First, we'll start with Winnie. She'll give a 15-minute overview of the theory and research around the meaning of work. Then we'll hear Axel, who will share a 15-minute testimonial, bringing all of these ideas to life in his own journey, from consulting to a climate entrepreneur. Next, we'll have a moderated conversation for about 10 minutes with Winnie and Axel to explore some of their ideas. And we will also use a selection of questions that many of you have submitted in the pre-webinar questionnaire. And then at around 12:45 Paris time, we'll open the floor for Q&A. You'll see on your Zoom link, on your Zoom screen, the Q&A box at the bottom. You can ask any question as the conversation unfolds. So please be generous with your questions and we'll take some of them. All right, so with further ado, I'm going to hand over to Winnie first. Winnie.
Thank you very much, Antoine, for the very nice introduction to kick us off. And indeed, Antoine and I had various meaningful collaborations that touches upon these topics on making fulfilling career transitions, which is close and clear to both of our hearts. So I'm really excited about this new collaboration together that we bring to the global INSEAD community. So I have been starting this question about how people find and sustain meaning in their work for almost 10 years. And it started in 2014, actually, when I started at Yale University in the United States as a first-year PhD student. And when I was a new PhD student, I was aware that I'm generally interested in trying to understand people's experience in their work and how that informs management. But we were tasked with a very important responsibility, which is figuring out our own research identity. We were asked to, just identify a clear enough research question for us to start doing some, research projects so that we can have a clear pathway towards graduation, writing our PhD thesis. So I was exploring. And one day in the library, I stumbled upon a book called Working by American author Stutz Terkel. And I read these phrases, in the introduction chapter of the book, which to this day, I still think is one of the most beautiful sentences that capture how people experience their work. And I will read to you all. He wrote, "Work is about a search for daily meaning as well as daily bread, for recognition as well as cash, for astonishment rather than torpor, in short, for a sort of life rather than a Monday through Friday sort of dying." So I think this really captures what work can be to us. It can be various different things. And of course, ideally, we don't want work just to be our paycheck. We also want it to be a source of energy, also purpose, and a source of sort of a self-esteem for us as human beings. So I decided, oh wow, I want to understand just why people see work in such different ways and experience such different meanings in what they do, what they choose to do for a living. So that becomes my first research project, and now, after sort of, I guess, over 10 years of time, I have consolidated all the insights I've gained from my research in the past 10 years into a series of courses, that I've been teaching at INSEAD since I joined INSEAD in 2019. And I collectively call these courses purpose-driven leadership. And it has three main components. It starts with the bottom, which is finding and understanding personal purpose for working, which is how people identify and know their own reason, their meaning, and their purpose for doing their job. And the second element is the top, actually, which is if you become a leader of a team and organization, how do you identify and articulate an organization's purpose? And then the last component is to align these two, aligning personal and organizational purpose, which is crucial to mobilizing everyone towards achieving a common goal or common purpose. Today, we are going to focus specifically on this sort of foundational component that is finding and understanding personal purpose. And I'm going to walk you through some sort of key research insights that are under this category. And as Antoine mentioned, right, in my research, I study a variety of different occupations. So I'm not just looking at typical white collar jobs that are sort of careers taken on by MBA graduates. I look at, very basic jobs, and sometimes sociologists may call the dirty work. These are jobs that can be physically, morally, relationally, sort of stained in some way that people may not feel that there is much meaning, right, beyond getting a paycheck. So I look at people doing this kind of work. And I also study people who work at, maybe sort of office type of work, but also in the lower status categories, like people working at the call centers, and also typical sort of administrative work at the entry level. I'd also look at work that are, often being seen as having a public service orientation, like journalists, and also public servants, right? People in civil services. And finally, of course, I look at consultants, I look at lawyers, look at bankers, these jobs that are being held by many of our students and also graduates of business schools in particular. And what I found is across a variety of different occupations, there are consistently three different types of people. So, yes, some may be sort of more dominant in certain occupations than others, but you will always, at least for me, when I was a researcher, I always find three types of people in any kind of work. Okay, and I will describe to you what each of these orientation, what each of these type of people looks like, and you can start reflecting when I'm reading this a vignette or description of this kind of person, which one sounds more like to you, either currently or at other stages of your career. Okay, so the first type of people is category A people. Okay, they work primarily to earn enough money to support themselves and their family. They do their jobs mostly for the compensation and benefits they provide. If they were financially secure, they would no longer continue with their current line of work, but would do something else instead. To these people, their jobs are basically a necessity of life. They often wish the time would pass more quickly at work. They greatly anticipate weekends and vacations. If these people live their lives over again, they probably would not go into the same line of work. These people are very eager to retire. And we call this category of people, people with a job orientation. Okay. And the second category of people generally feel fine with their work, but do not expect to be in their current jobs a few years from now. Instead, they plan to move on to better, higher level jobs. They have several goals for their futures pertaining to the positions they will eventually like to hold. Sometimes their work seems a waste of time, but they know that they must do sufficiently well in their current positions in order to move on. These people cannot wait to get a promotion. For them, a promotion means recognition of their good work and is a sign of their success in competition with coworkers. And we call these people those with a career orientation to their work. And finally, category C people see their work as one of the most important parts of life. They are very pleased that they are in their line of work because what they do for a living is a vital part of who they are. It is one of the first things they tell people about themselves. They tend to take their work home with them and on vacations too. The majority of their friends are from their places of employment, and they belong to several formal or informal groups and clubs relating to their work. They feel good about their work because they love it and because they think it betters others and the society. They will encourage their friends and children to enter their line of work. These people would be pretty upset if they were forced to stop working, and they're not particularly looking forward to retirement. And we call this group C those with a calling orientation. So what I just described are three types of work orientation, which captures the primary types of relationships or meaning we derived from our work. Those with a job orientation, they focus on the material benefits from work. They see work as a means to an end. So what I want to clarify here is that it's not that these people sees no meaning. Okay, it's just that those people with a job orientation, they see the meaning of their work comes primarily from providing them with the material benefits. Okay. And the second group, the career-oriented people, they focus on the status and power they could gain from advancing within the career structure. Again, it's not that they don't see any meaning, because colloquially we often see meaning as attached to some sort of higher purpose, but it basically refers to any reason for you to do your current job. And for the career-oriented people, the meaning of their work comes from allowing that to get into something else. It's a stepping stone towards something bigger that they want to achieve. And finally, calling-oriented people, they focus on the psychological fulfillment. They see work as an end in itself or contributing to a bigger cause that is personally and or socially important. So I think the number one insight I want to share is that meaning is not typically, as we thought, that's only attached to people with a calling orientation. Even if you have a job and career orientation, maybe you don't see yourself as having much meaning in your work, but there is. So this is something we need to remind ourselves. There is meaning in there. It's just not in the meaning that we talk about in the common or popular ways. And there are sort of more refined distinctions that we can make within, in particular, the calling orientation. And I will explain here more. So we can think of those with a job orientation as those who are more utilitarian, right? They will say, I do this work because I have to. It gives me the money that I want and I need to sustain my current lifestyle and to provide the best for my kids. right? And those with career orientation, they focus on the status. They say, I want to climb the ladder. That gives me the strongest fulfillment and satisfaction. And the calling orientation, they are calling, their sense of calling or meaning may come from slightly different sources. Some may say, is my passion. And this is something that I absolutely love, intrinsically love to do. Or it can be something they don't necessarily love to do intrinsically, but they know it's for a cause beyond themselves. It's for a service-oriented cause that matters. Okay, so they may not actually love it. Okay, and or it may not be for anything they love. It may not be for a greater cause beyond themselves, but they like the people they work with. That also can give them a sense of calling. They just want to be with the people that like themselves, right? And finally, this is about craftsmanship. It may not matter what specifically the kind of job you do. Whether you love it, whether you think it's for some important cause, or it's because of the people. It may be that there are some people that can be put in any type of job, and they are able to love and also do a great work in any type of job. And that's the sense of craftsmanship. Say whatever kind of work they are put into doing and they happen to find themselves at, they just want to produce the best work possible. And that kind of work ethics and value gives them a stronger sense of meaning. And also, a key insight from my research is that you may have one or more work orientations at a time. And your work orientation can definitely change over time. Some of you may already start to see yourself transitioning from being job oriented to career oriented and calling oriented. And that's a typical path that happens to many people. So, why does your work orientation matters? My research shows that if you are calling oriented, you typically earn more, even if we control the type of jobs, and you have a stronger chance of being promoted. And it doesn't necessarily because that your performance is better. Many people believe that if you love what you do, you can perform better. But it may not be always that case. Sometimes the job-oriented people can also perform better, especially if they're in jobs that clearly define, the criteria. A being job oriented doesn't mean that you are a bad performer. Okay, but it only because that people perceive you as better. Your managers always perceive those who love their work, who show a calling orientation, as better performers and more committed, and that's why they give you more bonus and more likely to recommend you for promotion. And also, what may relate to some of you is that if you have a calling orientation, clearly you have a stronger job satisfaction, and you may feel an overall higher sense of happiness in your life since work right now is such a strong part of our life. But it may take a toll in your personal health or well-being because you care so much about your work, and it can create stress, exhaustion, burnout, and work-life family. So it's harder for you to draw clear boundaries between your work and your personal life, especially your health. Okay. And it also matters if you're a leader, right? To understand every members of your team and their motivations and priorities through the lens of their work orientation. Why is everybody here doing the work, right? And what's their personal work orientation? And my research shows that when you have a team with complementary work orientations, they do better because work orientation is a source of diversity that can bring different values, opinions, and perspectives. And I mentioned earlier that typical path or trajectory I have observed is that people travel from job orientation to calling orientation. And this is a process of sort of deepening the meaning of work, right? People do not just want economic material benefits from what they do for a living, from their work anymore. Gradually, they also grow emotional attachments and they even start to ask for existential meaning from what they do. Okay, so this is a process of deepening the meaning of work that reflects how people transition from being job oriented to career and then calling oriented. And the natural question I get when I'm teaching this topic is how do you deepen the meaning of your work? And there were two frameworks that I often share. One is this sort of very commonly used finding purpose framework. And the idea is that if you can think about three things, okay, if you can find enjoyment, that is what gives you joy, okay, what gives you that sort of sense of passion. And second, if you are aware about your competence, what are you good at? What are you naturally sort of doing better at compared to other people? And the third is service. How do you want to serve the humanity? If you can identify some line of work, something you can pursue, that can, in some way combine the three, then you are on the trajectory to pursue a purposeful career. Okay, you will feel that higher sense of purpose. Another framework, the second framework, and this is the last sort of theoretical framework I want to share, is this pillars of meaningful work framework that comes out from my own research. And this pillars means that different people, they feel meaning from slightly different things, right? Different things can matter differently to people and give people a strong sense of meaning. And one is livelihood, right? You want to work to achieve financial goals, supporting self and loved ones financially and sustain and improve your lifestyle. And there's community. You want to work to connect with others, build and strengthen the bonds. There's recognition. Some people particularly care about being given, receiving affirmation, validation from other people to have this positive self-image. And there is some stimulation, developing the self, learning new skills, growing personally and professionally. And finally, there is impact, and that is the service component. They care about making a positive difference, contributing directly or indirectly to a worthwhile cause. To different people, what matters to them, what gives them meaning can be very different. For example, to me personally, I would say stimulation probably matters way more. If I go into office working for a day, not learning something new or not feeling that I have seen an old problem in a new light, I feel that day is wasted and I have, the work is not really meaningful. That at least that work I did for that day. So this gives people a framework to identify what are your personal pillars of meaning and how you can use this to guide you in finding your next career, which can allow you to express and find that calling expression. So some questions, I want to leave for you to think about as we continue with the webinar is, what's your work orientation to your current job? And what's the ideal work orientation you'd like to have with your job? And what are your pillars of meaningful work that can ideally help you get to that ideal work orientation? So that's it. And I'm going to stop here and turn to our next speaker.
Thank you, Winnie. Thank you for this insightful overview and also for the practical frameworks. Now, Axel, now we'd love to hear from you and share your journey from BCG to founding NetZero and see how perhaps Winnie's ideas connect with your own real life experience. And as I was listening to Winnie, I was wondering, did you move from a career orientation to calling orientation? And how do you relate your own experience to Winnie's pillars of meaning? So let's hear from you, Axel.
Great. Thank you, Antoine, and thank you, Winnie. I hope everyone hears me well. So I'm very happy to be participating today. I'll try maybe to give a bit of practical life to what Winnie was explaining. Before that, I thought it could be helpful so that everyone understands a bit what I'm doing and what NetZero, the company I founded, is doing. So I'll do a quick intro on carbon removal and climate, then talk briefly about NetZero, and then talk about how I got there and basically what it means and a bit moving the ladder that or the different steps that Winnie was explaining. So this is a bit of a complex graph, but to explain why carbon dioxide removal is important. So we're going to be talking climate. We have the COP30 in November, but actually there's been long-standing commitments of states to basically limit climate change. In the Paris Agreement, 10 years ago, there was an agreement to try to limit the warming to 1.5 degree. And that means basically stopping emission of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases by 2050. And so to do that and becoming net zero, which is the coin word for that. And so to do that, basically, we need, of course, to reduce as much as possible the emissions. And that's the gray line that you see. And stop the increase and then reduce. But at some point, we reach a level where it's very difficult to reduce the last 10% of emissions, because these are hard to abate industrial processes, this is agriculture and so on. And so to be net zero, you actually need to remove what we're still going to emit. And then we need to increase the removal so that we kind of reduce the climate debt that we're creating, because we're going to be overshooting actually the CO2 concentration that is the target. So carbon removal is a new industry, but it's an industry that needs to go up to about 10 billion tons of CO2 removed in 2050. 10 billion tons is a bit abstract, but just to give you an idea, the oil and gas sector extract collectively 6 billion tons. So we're talking about something same order of magnitude. This is a $1 trillion plus opportunity. And what we're doing at NetZero is trying to give a little stab at it. We're leveraging a technology which is called biochar, which is actually quite known, but has not scaled. And it's a kind of easy way, at least in principle, to remove CO2. So you have CO2 in the atmosphere, it's captured by plants through photosynthesis, we've all learned that. And then plants decay, are burnt, are digested, whatever, and the CO2 goes back into the atmosphere. So that's the natural cycle of nature. What we do is basically we take the plant residues and we heat them at very high temperature without oxygen in a process called pyrolysis. And through that, you create a product which looks a bit like charcoal. It has a bit different properties, which is carbon extracted from plants that is super stable. And so if you store it, in our case, we store it in soils, in agricultural soils, basically the carbon is going to remain there for thousands of years. And so you've taken away CO2 from the atmosphere, and that's the carbon removal effect. It happens that this process generates energy from the biomass itself, and so it's actually self-sustained, and actually you can even use extra energy to create heat or electricity for different industrial applications. So I'm not going to enter in the details, but that's basically the concept of biochar. And biochar is an IPCC validated solution, cannot solve the 10 billion challenge of carbon removal, but something anywhere between 2 and 4 billion. So it's not the technology that will solve everything, but it is a very large potential. And today, biochar, of all the carbon removal solutions that exist, is currently contributing to close to 90%, 90, of the total carbon removed for long-term removal. So our mission is to bring this solution at scale, basically for climate, but the carbon that is extracted also brings advantages. By mixing it in agricultural soils, it improves soil quality and so helps improve yields and resilience, helps reduce usage of fertilizer. So it's actually carbon from the atmosphere that is put to good use. And this is very important because it creates co-benefit and it creates a market for basically the product we're making. It also brings additional benefits like renewable energy, creates local job in rural areas. We operate in the global south, so that's very needed. It also avoids burning crop residues, which contribute a lot to air pollution, reduce pollution by nitrogen-based fertilizers and that other things. So actually, it is a climate thing, but that has also an agricultural angle and bringing other co-benefits. I'm not going to enter in details, but we've been operating now a bit more than 4 years. We have 5 plants. Actually, today we're announcing the construction of our 6th plant in Brazil. And the idea is to iterate on the technology, on the business model, and to start scaling. We need at some point to have hundreds of such plants to remove a million ton to begin with, and then go beyond. So that's what NetZero is doing. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but just give you a little feel. So how did I get there? So there's many ways to tell the story. Actually, a funny way is just to say, basically, I have followed a life in green. I did engineering studies at École Centrale, which had at this time a green logo. Then I went to Hachette Publisher that had a green logo. I went to INSEAD, green logo, BCG, green logo, and NetZero, green logo. So that's the thread, and that basically explains it all. It's a bit by chance, but when you look backwards, it's always fun to find some connections. More seriously, what I did without actually thinking about it is built a series of building blocks that then allow basically to do net zero. So the first building block was engineering. Did that as a master's in engineering in France. And that gives basically the foundations to understand, processes, technology, and the likes. Climate came very early. At a time where very few people were interested in what was called global warming. I started to research and be very interested in the topic, and actually went to the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992, which is now known also as COP0. So it's the first multi-government conference that basically launched the COP process. So climate was kind of deep into my center of interest, but in a way, I didn't do anything about it concretely, apart from researching, going to Rio and those kind of things. Then there was the kind of business angle, and that's INSEAD and kind of the work I did after that. And that was another brick in kind of trying to build something. Initially it was, this is going to be useful. I want to do more kind of business things that deep engineering. So INSEAD was a good way for that. And I learned a lot of skills that I'm using now. Then after business school, went to consulting. I ended up actually spending much more time than I thought. Initially, I thought I'm going to spend the 2-3 years, typical of an MBA student thinking, ahead. Ended up spending, it was not 2-3 years, it was 23 years. But here basically learned things around, strategy, business model, and so on. Again, without an idea to apply it to net zero or to actually a business. I thought I was not done for entrepreneurship. I didn't follow, unfortunately, any entrepreneurship class at INSEAD. But I got a number of foundations that then were used to conceptualize and launch net zero. And last but not least, biochar. So biochar, it's a long story. My father actually pioneered biochar production about 20 years ago through an NGO he had launched in a kind of a change of career. And he decided to launch an NGO to protect rainforest, discovered biochar that had just been rediscovered by science and had become a kind of very reference figure in that world. And so I heard about biochar, long before starting net zero, and basically was kind of knowledgeable of the potential and was kind of excited of what could be done. So this is things that got together, but without a plan. I can say afterwards, read the story and say, oh, this made all sense, and since the beginning it was bound to happen. Absolutely not. It's a bit like the Steve Jobs story that many of you know, where he learned calligraphy, and that basically was and design, and that was kind of the input to the design of Macintosh and the interface and so on. And basically, it tells the story looking backwards. It makes a lot of sense, but of course, at that time, it didn't make any sense. So what brought all the bricks together? Actually, a very unlikely event, because at the end of 2020, I had no idea, or 2019, sorry, I had no idea about net zero. I didn't think I was an entrepreneur. And the thing was kind of, maybe I continue at BCG or I'm going to change but I didn't know what to do. And then came COVID. And in February 2020, I was locked down at home with my kids. And one of them was very interested in biochar. And we started just talking initially. And then IPCC had recognized biochar as a carbon removal solution very recently. And so we started kind of toying around with the idea, oh, if we add carbon credits to a biochar model, would that fly, and so on. And started running a few numbers so that it was working at kind of super high level, started to dig, and we dug until end of August 2020, where we had a full presentation, kind of BCG style. I had applied the tools I knew, presenting the opportunity, the business model, how to launch, and so on. And at the end of August, coming back from vacation, I was so excited, and I thought, okay, I found what I want to do. It's very risky, but I want to give it a try, and I don't want to regret it. And so I came back from vacation and told BCG I would be leaving, and took a few months to leave. And actually, NetZero was incorporated in January 2021. So that's how it got there. The three protagonists, it's a 3-generation story. So you have my father on the left, me in the middle, and my son Olivier on the right. And basically, that was all NetZero. This is in the fall of 2020. That was all the company at that time. Now we are 160 people, and hopefully growing now very rapidly to 500 in the next 18, 24 months. So that's a bit the story of how I got there. I think there was an idea of a purpose that crystallized at some point. The foundations were the bricks I mentioned earlier, and the building blocks, and this idea that I wanted to do something different at some point of my life. Initially, I thought the day you turn 50, you're going to stop consulting and you'll do something else. Actually, when I turned 50, I didn't have any idea. So I said, okay, let's push it to 51. And then I pushed it to 52. And I would have kept maybe pushing if there had not been this COVID and this crystallization of the idea. So last slide, and then we can open up to question, building a bit on Winnie's framework. I have this one that I like, the IKIGAI concept. So IKIGAI is the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And through NetZero, and the story will tell, maybe we'll fail miserably in a couple of years, and well, maybe we'll succeed moderately, or maybe we'll succeed a lot. But at least today, I found my IKIGAI. I think I'm good because of all the past experience at kind of helping build the company. I love doing that. We're working with great people. There's a sense of, mission and purpose. The world needs it. That was my first slide on carbon removal. And lucky enough, I can be paid for bit a modest salary of CEO, and maybe one day in shares if the thing works. Actually, one of the things where I was very lucky and that made the shift easy is that having worked many years before in consulting, the financial thing was a bit less of a stress, so I could take risks. But maybe at some point, NetZero can also be a profitable venture, but time will tell. It's too early. So I'm going to stop here, and maybe Antoine, you want to end on the question part.
Thank you, Axel, and we look forward to NetZero's continued success. It's funny because oftentimes when I do career coaching, I ask people, how did your career happen? Was it out of serendipity or was it by design? And oftentimes the answer is it's both. And I think in your case, you really explained that you basically had a purpose that crystallized over time, and there were these building blocks that you explained. Now, for the next 10 minutes, we'll continue the conversation with Axel, and Winnie will explore some of their ideas. And we will also go through some of the questions that some of you have asked in the pre-webinar survey. But first, Winnie, I'm curious, when you hear Axel's story about moving from a fairly traditional career at BCG to becoming an entrepreneur, what are your sort of comments, reactions, and as they relate to your research? What explains someone making those steps, perhaps later in life?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, thank you, Estelle, very much for sharing your very inspiring journey. And every time, I did an interview, because my research relies mostly on interview reflective, introspective sort of data, right? That I got gathered through having deep conversations with my participants. And I think, what I learned from you, aligns with a lot of stories I heard from other people in some way, but also difference in some way. What aligns, I think, I share the competence and service and so the three sort of values that lead to the purpose, framework that's commonly used by many people. That's very much similar to the IKIGAI framework, I think, Estelle was sharing. So I think that very much aligns. But I think also what I did not mention in my presentation is there is also a thread of sort of initially maybe people are following what society or their immediate community believes is a good career. And then increasingly people becomes to feel more free to sort of craft their personally meaningful career. So can kind of break free from the what sort of traditional definition of what a good career looks like, to then think about what's meaningful for them, what means to be having purpose. So I think that's something that I noticed in your journey as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And Axel, I mean, you've built NetZero with obviously a strong mission-driven culture, and it looks like you have a highly motivated team. Now, I wonder what lesson you took perhaps from consulting, from all of your consulting years at BCG, and how did you sort of apply that in a very new environment? I guess different types of people. So how did you transfer your skills, so to speak?
Uh, well, I'd say the initial thing was kind of almost as a BCG project, building the business model and the business case and the strategy around what we wanted to do, which I think contributed a lot then to the success. So that this was kind of direct application of what I was doing, and then I think what I got is, of course, some experience and business sense and those kind of things from having done lots of consulting. But there's a couple of things that really stand out. I'd say the first one is the ability, the network, and the ability to talk to kind of senior people, CEOs, to engage them and to kind of bring a set of partners on board. And that was very important because initially, when you're a startup, you have a deck of slides and a few people, and that's it. The second thing that was very important is the defining ways of working and culture for the company. Because I was really convinced from my previous experience that this was very important, all the more that we are a very international organization with people working remotely on 3 continents from day one, initially during the COVID phase where we could not even travel. And so working on the culture and the organization was absolutely fundamental. And we actually spent lots of time here, and we've embedded for a very small startup some pretty sophisticated tools, in the way we work. So I think that was another very important thing that I brought from the consulting world. Then there's everything around, finance and business modeling and capital raise and the kind of the toolbox of the consultant with kind of financial angle, which of course was also very, very useful. And last but not least, I brought some very strong connection with BCG, my previous employer, and BCG was very helpful at the beginning. So was the first customer for carbon credits. We did some projects together, free project, paid projects. I've had lots of support from the BCG organization. That was also a kind of legacy of my previous work.
Indeed. So I want to move on to some of the questions that our audience have asked in the pre-webinar question. And one of these questions, which is actually more a statement, is rather provocative. I'm going to read it out loud to you. So this person says, I worked at corporate law firms and investment banks. I wanted to have purpose and decided to pursue a career in sustainable finance. It took me 10 years to transition, only to experience my dream job turning into a nightmare. Hence concluding purpose alone isn't the answer. I wonder, Winnie or Axel, what are your responses to that? Is it that actually purpose isn't that important?
I'm
Winnie, do
happy
you
to,
want to start?
yes, happy to take a first step at trying to help, this audience make sense of their experience. So I don't have a clear answer, but this is sort of how I do my sense making, in this journey. We all have, periods, right, in our work and career that we see, the grass probably is greener on the other side. There is the sense that what we are doing right now doesn't have what we actually want, but what we are very, very clear that these other things X, has what we want. So there could be, that expectations, are just not the same as the realities, what we think, what we believe, what it should be like is actually not true. So that if that is the case, that I think to really live, a purposeful career, to find a purpose career requires us to do some sort of due diligence in some sense, right? Like, and that due diligence involves not just self-reflection, right? Knowing what are the pillars of the meaning, right? Like if you think that you want impact in your work, right? Then you're clear about that. If you think you want community, if you think you want recognition or stimulation in your work, you know very clearly what are the pillars that give you meaning. And the next step will be to do the homework of figuring out. You don't necessarily have to really start working in it, maybe, but talk to people who have worked in that field for many, many years to actually have a check with them if those pillars of the meaning that matters very much to you are actually present when you are doing the work. So a personal story. I hope, my husband will not mind me sharing his experience. He is an INSEAD alum, actually. So I'm really embedded at INSEAD. After I joined INSEAD, I took this job. I married an INSEAD alum, and now we have a family. So he started in consulting, and then he thought he was very passionate about sports. Okay, and so he transitioned from consulting into working for a sports media company, and he was super thrilled. Early in his career, he's doing something he's extremely passionate about since he was a child. Right, but after he started his job, he realized what he does on a daily basis is taking clients out for dinner. It's nothing about sports, really. It's taking clients out for dinner. And he realized what he has to engage in on a daily basis is not aligned with the pillars of meaning. So I think, what I would say, based on that audience experience is maybe the learning for us is to, reflect on your own pillars of meaning and then check if that actually exists and are dominant in the daily work experiences in your expected field. Yeah.
Wonderful. So at this point, I want to take some questions from the Q&A box. We've received so many questions, we're not going to be able to tackle all of them. But I'd like to start with the question from Hui Ping, which actually turns the responsibility to leaders and companies. So here's Hui Ping question. How can leaders help employees find deeper meaning in their work to sustain motivation and resilience? Any thoughts on that, both from the field, so to speak, with Axel or Winnie from your research? Axel, how do you do that with employees?
I'm lucky I don't have to do that because the people, at this stage in NetZero have come because of the meaning of the company and because of the mission and so on. So they already have it. I think it's tricky, the leader can inspire, can give kind of a vision of what they want to do and try to bring people on board. But, finding the deeper meaning is, I think more it's a person's job, not the leader. Of course, when you're doing a job, you can find, in the immediate environment, some meaning. It can go beyond just, the immediate job you're doing today, and can, be some kind of projection. But, saying, okay, I'll sit down and I'll wait for the leadership to give meaning, deep meaning to my work, it's not going to work. It needs to come from you. And if you don't find it, maybe look somewhere else or try to craft your own kind of territory, I would say.
Yeah. So I will speak from more sort of a research theoretical perspective, right? Like I think what Axel is suggesting is you do it through selection, right? So typically how we, train people, find people to work together, the first approach is selection. You select the people that have those traits and characteristics that Axel mentions, that they are just resilient. If they're in very challenging situations, they're resilient enough to find positive meanings out of it. And like they know, what's the purpose of their job, and they just are innately sort of equipped to do that. So, you can definitely sort of ensure that you have the necessary structure and process in your selection process to make sure you get the right people. And the next approach is socialization. And you get the people into your organization and you socialize them into believing in your causes, in your purposes. And another part of it, there are two type of people maybe, right? Like you select the people based on their skills and capabilities and competences, not necessarily because whether their purpose aligns with your organization, because you do need their skills, their competences to help you. Right? And these people, you can socialize them into believing your values, into believing your organization's causes. And that will require leadership, right? That will require leadership's purpose. What I call is basically you need the leaders to convey effectively the purpose of the organization. And the second group will be, well, these are people when at the selection stage, they indeed, believe in the purpose of organization. They find meaning in what they will be doing, but maybe they encounter challenges. Maybe they realize, as the earlier question was suggesting, there were some unexpected things they didn't foresee, and that crash a little bit their initial sense of purpose. And at this time, you also need leaders to come in to help them sort of restore and sustain that sense of purpose. And I think there are these two kind of junctures, in the socialization process do require leaders to effectively convey purpose. And there are specific, right, formats leaders can do that, either through sort of big meetings, inspirational speech, right? Think about the typical JFK, we choose to go to the moon, and that's the sort of inspirational, motivational speech. Or it could be one-on-one conversations, deeper one-on-one conversations where you figure out, where the person is at in their career, and what they're particularly looking for, what they're really trying to understand is their personal pillars of meaning, or where to find these pillars of meaning in their current job.
Great. This next question from Paul really looks at people who are looking for their next job or next role. And the question is, what advice would you give us to identify and assess companies that truly align with our beliefs, values, and expectations, particularly when it comes to having a meaningful impact and a strong social orientation consistent with our true north, without having to take the risk of joining first and then realizing there's no fit? Happens a lot, by the way. I mean, we do a lot of INSEAD career coaching, and we find these situations more often than we would wish. So I wonder what advice you may have on sort of finding the true north without having all the information, I suppose.
Maybe I'll give the practical approach, but I think it really, of course, you need to do some research and so on. First of all, you need to know, what you're looking for. And I think that's a big part of the work and the coaching services that INSEAD, serve that purpose. There are many ways to get information from, inside the company. The easiest one is to talk to employees, to talk to clients, to talk to suppliers, to talk to the ecosystem around the company. And of course, it's not going to be as accurate as being inside for many months, but I think you can get a pretty good feel from, there are some things like Glassdoor and so on, but then, you just reach out and you, you talk. Hopefully there's a few insiders into this company, and that's helpful. But, I think there's also something around, and it relates to what Winnie was saying. It's also, crafting then your position once you are in the company. So it's not, a kind of, I hate the attitude to say, okay, I'm a kind of, I need the leadership to inspire me. I need the company to give me purpose. I need the company to find, a spot for me where I'm going to be kind of shining and so on. It's also roll up your sleeves and make the room, for it. Find the purpose, change the company. So of course, you don't want to go into an ugly place first, but it's also a kind of attitude where you can change actually a lot of things, and if you're in management position, even more, in existing places. So of course, don't go to a place where everyone outside the company and around it say, oh, this is awful. It's, it does not align with what you want. But then, shape it.
Right. We need any additional suggestion there?
I absolutely agree. And I think what Axel was alluding to is this take an entrepreneurial mindset, even when you are joining a established company, or joining it, but you're a newcomer and you bring a lot of fresh new insights. And maybe you don't like something there and it's not aligned with your expectation, but you can actually be proactive enough to take initiatives to change it. So I think that is and what we call job crafting. You can, I think Estelle used the word craft as well. That's reflecting this entrepreneurial mindset that you should take to, make the work meaningful for yourself rather than expect other people to make the work meaningful for you. Yeah, I think that's the difference.
And indeed, I believe Google has experimented this job crafting concept. And the outcome was that those who used it, who could design or shape or adapt their roles according to their preferences, stayed longer with the company. So there was a business benefit of retention of talent. We still have time for a final question. I'm going to take the question from Irene, who kind of broadens the horizons and looks forward. Here is Irene's comment. She says, it is increasingly said that the future of work will be less career ladder and more portfolio career, and more people are going to go for solopreneurship or entrepreneurship. And we have the example of Axel here. What do you think this means about careers in the future, in the context of purposeful careers, and how the relationship between organizations and worker will evolve? That's a big question, but so what's the future of career in a nutshell? If we have a crystal ball.
Again, maybe I'll shoot first and then Winnie can give the theory around it. But, I think at least my experience is, you need to build a portfolio of skills, knowledge, networks, and so on, without necessarily an end goal, but the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more options you'll have in the future. And so, of course, careers are fragmented, people change jobs more and more, and, we all know the story, but there's something around, learning skills, and can be a very broad range of things. And the more you see your career as, grabbing more tools in your toolbox, if you have a sense of purpose, at some point you look at the toolbox and you say, oh, with all of this, I can do something, and so I'd say, especially for the younger ones, but also for the ones in the middle of the career, look at diversity, learn new things, change industry, change jobs, change career path, go to entrepreneurship, and then come back and so on. Because if you have a sense of purpose, you'll find a way to make that good use. If you just do the same thing over and over again, and even worse in the same company, then your options are very limited.
So with those words, we're going to close our webinar today. Thank you so much, Winnie and Axel, for your insights, your inspiring contributions. And I just want to remind our listeners, this is INSEAD Global Day, right? So there's a lot more events coming our way. These are the next two events. one on AI, and one still on careers, actually, the new working paradigms with Professor Mark Mortensen and Eve Ensman. So I really urge you to attend it as well. Thank you all for your participation, and enjoy the rest of your day.